Can you hear now? Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay. Okay, perfect.
Great.
Thanks. Yes. This is going to be tough, but I hope it works out. Thanks.
Thank you. It looks like our attendees are coming in. So welcome everybody who is coming in right now. Let's wait for a few more people, maybe give everybody. Our panelists are ready. We'll just sort out and make sure we do another roll call and that everybody's sound is connected. Okay, so to just give everybody an overview of what to expect today, we'll have, while we wait for everybody to come in, kind of the structure of the event. So welcome. And we'll start by introducing the speakers for today, including for opening remarks, for keynote, for a video we'll have for you today, as well as our panelists. From then we'll have opening remarks from Kelsey. Then we'll do a keynote speaker from a survivor who will be anonymous for this event. Then I'll introduce the co-authors of the report on which this event is based, Jesse and David, and they'll be in a video for you, which kind of also gives a brief overview of what the report and this event is centered around. Then Monica will introduce each panelist, and the panelists will each take their turn speaking. Afterwards, we have a question and answer, a moderated question and answer that we will be asking from our own questions, but we'll also be taking questions from the chat after that section. Some of the questions will be look out for the answers from either Monica and I on there, and then we will conclude. So let's just see if we have all the panelists.
Okay, good evening and probably good morning, good afternoon from to everyone who has managed to join in to this webinar from the different places that you're at. My name is Monica Chamazima. I head the legal program at Willow International, and I'm going to be taking us through the preliminaries, introducing the speakers for today's event. And then I will be moderating together with Krisha May, who has spoken to us earlier. And then we'll moderate the event and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I'm going to start off the introducing the members on today's panel, people who are going to speak to us today. Kelsey Morgan is the founder and executive director to stop human trafficking and provide life-saving services to survivors. She lived in East Africa for 3 years, from 2010 to 2013, where she designed and implemented an aftercare program for survivors of trafficking. She founded Willow to meet the growing demands for quality aftercare and to transform systems that fuel trafficking. Kelsey will be delivering opening remarks today and welcoming everyone into the webinar. Sorry. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Next, that's me. And I'm a practicing advocate, currently working with Willow International's legal program. Krisha May, who spoke to us a little earlier, is a law fellow for Willow International. She first worked with Willow as a student attorney at the University of South California's Gould International Human Rights Clinic. There she also worked on with the Clooney Foundation for Justice's Trial Watch and as a Tagalog interpreter on a trafficking case. She has previously worked for the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, One Justice in San Francisco, and the human rights organization LBHM in Indonesia. Thank you, Krisha. We'll meet David together with Jesse when we share the video that we have prepared for you. David Wright is also a USC Gould alum who co-wrote today that is being launched at this event. He's a student attorney with the Gould's International Human Rights Clinic. He has worked with HNA Group Limited in Haiku, China, and for the Honorable Leslie Kobayashi at the United States District Court for the District of Hawaii. As part of the International Human Rights Clinic, David also worked with the Clooney Foundation for Justice's Trial Watch project. David and Jesse Menz are co-authors of the report that we are going to share today. Jesse is also a USC Gould alum who co-wrote the analysis report. And like David, he is a student attorney with Gould's International Human Rights Clinic. He worked with the International Justice Mission, U.S. Department of State's Office to Monitor and Combat Human Trafficking, and was also a student attorney for labor trafficking cases through the International Human Rights Clinic at USC. Hilary Talemwa, who is an advocate. He's with us today representing the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. He has over 10 years experience in formulation and implementation of labor laws and policies. He's a trained professional in labor markets and strengthening consular and labor attaché services for better governance and protection of migrant workers. He currently heads the External Employment Department at the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, which is a key stakeholder in the implementation of the labor externalization program. He is also a member of the Joint Implementation Committee for Bilateral Agreements. Welcome, Hilary. Next, we have Agnes Igoye. Agnes is the Deputy Coordinator for Prevention of Trafficking in Persons. She's a social worker and a campaigner against human trafficking. In addition to being a training manager on control. Welcome, Agnes. We have Buite Lydia, who is a human rights development lawyer. She holds a master's in law, postgraduate in tax administration, and a bachelor's in law. She's currently working as a director of programs at Platform for Labor Action. She has worked extensively on labor migration issues, including being part of a technical committee to review the employment of Ugandan migrant workers abroad regulations, Uganda Law Reforms Commission Technical Working Group on the review of labor externalization program. She has facilitated trainings of recruitment companies on ethical recruitment practices. She has facilitated pre-departure orientation for migrant workers and presented papers at regional migration conferences. We are very glad to have you with us, Lydia, and we look forward to benefiting from your insights. We have with us as well Odetsa Boli is a program manager, labor mobility and human development at the International Organization for Migration, Uganda. She was until February 2020, head of the Labor, Migration and Human Development Unit at IOM Burundi for 2 years. She was active on labor migration governance and policy, diaspora engagement, remittances, financial inclusion, and literacy. Caribbean Pacific EU migration program for the West and Central Africa at IOM Regional Office in Dakar. She has provided technical assistance on remittances, trafficking of persons, smuggling, visa and readmission to 7 African countries, as well as 2 regional economic communities, that is ECOWAS and ECCAS. She has also worked EHA regional office in Dakar. She has a strong UN working knowledge, and she was OCHA's focal point within the UNDAF peer support group. She also has extensive gender working experience and has worked for 2 years with Oxfam regional office in West Africa. Welcome all our panelists. We look forward to benefiting from your diverse expertise on the subject that we shall be discussing today. So I would like to welcome Kelsey to deliver opening remarks and get us started on today's event. Kelsey, you're welcome.
Thank you, Monica, for kicking us off. So I have the pleasure of formally welcoming you all to the Protecting Migrant Laborers virtual event presented by our organization, Willow International, and our partner, Human Rights Clinic. Willow is a nonprofit organization working to end trafficking and offer support to those who have been affected by human trafficking. Our work centers around providing restorative aftercare services to survivors and advocacy for sustainable systems change. We are part of the coalition of dedicated civil service organizations in Uganda working to combat trafficking called UCATIP. I see many of you here with us today, so thankful for your support. The network is doing amazing collaborative work providing services to victims and contributing to policy formulation and reform in Uganda. Last year, we collaborated with USC's International Human Rights Clinic to analyze Uganda's labor externalization policies with a focus on the bilateral agreements between Uganda and 3 destination countries. One of these has since been suspended. This event is all about sharing with you what we learned in that report and opening up a dialogue change can be made so that we can protect migrant laborers with our policies and how we handle migration. We are really fortunate this morning to have a brave young woman who has experienced firsthand being trafficked under the guise of labor migration. She is here to share her expertise and her insights. And her hope is that by sharing this, she can inspire some much needed change so that others are not victimized like she was. Thank you so much to all of our panelists who have graciously agreed to facilitate this important discussion. And thank you for joining us today, wherever you may be in the world. In discussing the nuances of issues facing migrant workers and trafficking prevention and opening up discussion on challenges and promising next steps, we hope to add momentum to movements protecting migrant workers and improve the systems in place that make it possible to do so. We're excited. We're this month, we've done a lot this month, especially all of you commemorate World Day Against Human Trafficking. So we hope that this event will help get us ready to commemorate that tomorrow. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Kelsey, for those opening remarks. I'll just briefly go through our agenda. We hope to be here. We hope to be together up to about 7:30 p.m. today, East African time. So we are, as Krisha said, we are going to begin by hearing from a survivor who will remain anonymous as part of Willow and UCATIP's victim protection protocols. We will just refer to her as BN. BN, you're welcome to share with us what you have to say. BN will speak Luganda, which is one of the local languages in. There will be someone at the end of her address who will summarize what she has said in English. BN, you're welcome. Just let's give her a minute to
Hello. Mwasibye mutya eyo madam?
Ongeyo oyogere tukuwulira.
Amanya gange nza mugamanyi. Nze nali nkolera Saudi Arabia naye nga okuva e Uganda nayitira mu kampuni bagiyita Provio, abamu bagiyita Jobmart naye nga ku kipande kyabwe kuliko Provio erirungujja. Simanyi oba mumpulira.
Tukuwulira nnyabo, tukuwulira bulungi.
Wento we natambuliramu eyo kampuni entwala paka Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia natuukira mu gundi ku office nga bagiyita Sola. Ne tusula mu kisulo olunaku lumu nga we twagenda. Enkeera ne batuza ku office ne batuwa babbosi baffe ne batutwala. Naye nze we natandikira obuzibu bwe nafuna ne mukama wange yasooka nti omukyala we yali tamanyi Luzungu ng'ate omwami yamanyi Oluzungu. kati embeera nebeera waasi nga omusajja wayogera nange ayina okwogera nange okubiddiza mukyala we ate nga mukyala we nga atabuka omukyala ng'akola omwami nga takola omwami nga ndagira kola kino omukyala ate wadda n'atabuka omwami nga wamunyonyola nti ze namugamye akole wati ne wati nga bitabuka olwo yavaamu omukyala n'agamba njagala bbawe ku lwansonga nali njogeranga na bbawe mu luzungu bbawe ng'amuddiza mu lwewaabwe oluwalabu kuba nali sirumanyi bwe nalaba ng'embeera etabuse ne mbasaba banzizeyo ku ofiisi ne banzizeyo ku ofiisi ne banfunira omukyala omukyala mukulukulu era nasanga yakamala okudivosinga ne bbaawe ne ntandika okubeera naye awo wakati mu covid embeera yatabuka oyo covid yasooka omukyala n'aŋŋamba nkole mu nnyumba nnya mbu ne ofiisi ekimanyi ne mugamba madaamu najja kola mu nnyumba emu naye nga ŋŋamba okola mu nnyumba nnya mu ne ofiisi ekimanyi nga mu nnyumba nnya mwe nina okukola omusala gwe gumu gwegwo nga wenkola awo ne bajja ne banona ne bantwala ewalala ne bajja ne banona ne bantwala ewalala nalaba mmenyeka ne mga madaamu sijja kumalako ate sikuba ku ofiisi njogere nabo oba nziza ku ofiisi nga otukuba ku ofiisi wakuba ku ofiisi n'abampa nga njogera ne agenti waffe bannayuganda baali bamuyita Sula mwami Sula nga wenjogera naye ng'agamba guma webito ebirina okuba linda covid yagwemu tukutikodde waka ne mugamba ogereeko n'omukyala n'atuuka ekiseera nannyimanga emmere nga tampa mmere tampa mazzi ate ng'ayagala nkole nnyo nkole mu nnyumba ezo nnya wekyagaana ne mugamba nziza ku ofiisi nyamba ne mbakubira b'ofiisi ne mbagamba ne muntaazo omukyala tampa kyakulya tampa kyakunywa ne bagamba gumiikiriza guma beerayo guma kati omukyala oyo n'aŋŋamba tugende bankube empiso egema coronavirus naye nga nasanga ne munne boogera nga munne amugamba ntwale mu ddwaliro bankube empiso nsobole okukola mwezi ennyumba nnya nga maanyi nnina ne ŋŋaana nga nsula wansi amazzi nywa ga mutooyi siina kyakulya siina kyakunywa okumala ennaku nnya olunaku olwokutaano ne muga madaamu ntwala ku ofiisi nga njogera nabo nga tebakyagala kumpuliriza banvaako omukyala n'atuuka n'aŋŋamba nzikirize antunde ng'amaze okunteekamu eyo embeera ey'obutampa kyakulya ey'obutampa kyakunywa obutampa ddagala n'atuuka esaala n'aŋŋamba ntunde ye anguze omuwalabu omulala ne mugamba tekisoboka nziza ku ofiisi n'aŋŋamba oba sikkiriza muwe ssente ze zeyangula ku ofiisi ne mugamba tugende ku ofiisi bakuwe ssente zo nze ogutegeragane ne ofiisi n'agaana omukyala nga alaba nemeddeko ansibidde mu ruumu andooza alaba ngenda kufa n'anfulumya n'ankanyuga ku street nembeera ku street ya Saudi Arabia poliisi we yajja n'ennonda n'entwala ku poliisi ne bampa ekyokunywa ne bampa amazzi ne bampa emmere ne bambuuza ofiisi gye navaako ne ngibabuulira ne babakubira essimu ofiisi still yagaana okujja ku poliisi okumpiikingayo kati poliisi obudde we bwaziba ne batufulumya ebweru ffenna nga twalimu poliisi we batufulumya ebweru nga ffenna we twalimu ne batugamba mugende teriyo nnyonyi etambula wano tetulina kyakulya ofiisi yammwe egaanyo banona mugende ekyamazima twabeera ku street za Saudi Arabia okumala wiiki nnamba nga tusula okwo poliisi weeyamba nejja neeyoola emisana netukanyuga mu kkomera ekiro ne batufulumya ne tuyita mu buzibu obw'enkomere. Ne tunoonya embase ye Uganda gyeri naye ebiseera ebyo twali tukolera Madiina nga embase eri Riyadh nga gye tulina ogisanga. Twetetenkanya ne tugenda paka ku embase. Ebintu byange byonna baabiwamba, ssente zange nasigala mangi emyezi 4 nga tebaginsasudde, buli kimu yakimpambako talina kiyampa okuva ku passport, simu, ssente byonna yabiwamba. Agenda nga wendi. Ekyamazima natuuka ku embase. Minisita Yasini n'ambuuza mwannyinaze oli mulwadde? Ekyamazima nali mulamu naye nga ndabika ng'omulwadde kuba nali nvaako nevu olw'embeera gye nayitamu. Nayita mu mbeera nzibu. Paka ku embase we twabeerayo, embase ne batukolera ne batuleetera aba UN pula ebyakomawo ewaka era ne batuyamba ne batuzza ewaka aba UN. Naye nadda nga wendi, nadda mikono myereere, omuntu eyagenda okukola. Yeyo embeera mwe nayita. Hello.
Weebale nnyo, weebale kusharinga naffe. Bright, could you just give us a brief translation, please?
Okay. Thank you so much, Monica. I hope you can hear me well. And my name is Bright Bengoma. I'm working closely with BN. We've been moving through recovery from what she went through. And I'd like to interpret and wrap up exactly what BN was taken to Saudi Arabia, and it was recruited by a company known as Jobmat Provibio in Lunguja, Saudi Arabia. She went to Saudi Arabia. She said she moved and traveled to Saudi Arabia. The night in Saudi Arabia at an agent's office. She stayed at that for one day, and the next day she was picked up by a lady who took her to her house. Her boss came and picked her up from the office and took her to the house. When she entered the first house which she went to work for, could speak English, the wife could not understand English. The husband had to interpret what she was saying to the wife. So all that interpretation led to the wife getting so jealous about her, about BN. Continue working. At that point, she called back the office to go to another house. The office took her away from the first house and led her to another house. At that house, she was referred to another elderly woman. That elderly woman made her work in 4 houses plus her. So she was working for her and other 4 houses of her relatives. And she was giving her the same salary. So she kept telling the woman, I'm working in 4 houses, yet you're paying me 1 salary. Why can't the other 4 people pay me because I'm also working for them? She said that she didn't answer her back. She kept on telling her, you work. So BN felt like she was broken. She couldn't manage, and she was not being given food. She was not given drink, anything to drink. She even told us that she was drinking from the cistern, from the toilet, and she was working. She reached a point where she felt so sick, and they told her that they had to take her to the hospital to give her an injection. But she shared that when she went to get that injection, they told her it was a coronavirus injection. She suspected that there was something wrong with this injection, so she refused the injection. Remember her sharing that injections were given to them so that it could boost them and give them extra energy to do work. So she remembered her friend telling her that, so she rejected that injection. She wanted to sell, okay, she wanted to go back to the office, but the office kept telling her she can handle. That's how things are. So she decided that she needed to move, so she left the house. But before she left, the woman removed everything from her, removed the passport, removed her belongings, removed everything, even the little money. But she also said that she was not paid for the 3 months she had worked there. The woman, the lady, the elder lady, threw her onto the street and left her on the street. When police picked her up, she stayed on the street for 1 week and stayed with the police for another day until they took her to the embassy of Uganda. It was there that the UN took statements from her and they were able to bring her back. Yes, briefly, I've wrapped it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Bian. We are super grateful that you have come to speak with us today. And thank you as well, Bright, for translating. And now next on the agenda, we have a video for you presented by Jesse and David, kind of as an overview of the report they co-wrote, which this event is centered around, the Protecting Migrant Laborers report. So Lindsay, whenever you're ready, could you please show the video? I think the sound might. Lindsay, I was wondering if you could, the sound isn't appearing for me.
Let me try one more time, just one moment.
Thank you. So while we wait for the video, I just wanted to also say hello to everybody joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. We are live, so thank you for that. And thank you for some of the participants who have recently joined us in the last few minutes. Thank you for coming.
I'm Jesse Mentz. I graduated in 2021 from USC Gould School of Law. I was part of the International Human Rights Clinic there with David and Krisha May. We got to do a really interesting report on analyzing Uganda's bilateral labor agreements and memorandum of understanding with 3 countries where a lot of Ugandan migrant laborers work.
Hi everyone, I'm David Wright. I was also part of the USC International Human Rights Clinic back in the 2019-2020 academic year. And I'll start us off by talking just a little bit about the economic and labor situation in Uganda that kind of led up to why a lot of Ugandan workers decide to go abroad to even work in the first place. The Ugandan economy is sort of in a stagnation. There isn't enough jobs in the Ugandan economy to support this large, young labor force. However, abroad in these Middle Eastern countries, there are a lot of job openings that pay very well. However, these jobs are usually very rudimentary, like housekeeping jobs, security guard jobs, and whatnot. Despite this pay disparity, where, for example, Ugandan labor might only make $50 a month in Uganda, but can make $200 a month in Saudi Arabia, for example, a lot of these Ugandan workers decide to go abroad so that they can support their families and send remittances back to Uganda, right? And so they decide to go abroad to pursue that increased earning potential. And this has created this very interesting situation where a security guard, for example, in Saudi Arabia, can make more than a Ugandan doctor working in Uganda. So let's talk a little bit about the domestic labor laws in these 3 Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, which are the 3 countries that Uganda has signed either a BLA or MOU with. All 3 countries, if you just read their domestic labor laws, have quite protective terms for workers in general. For example, in Saudi Arabia, money owed to workers is considered first-class debt, which means laborers who are owed money from their employers are able to be first in line to claim money from, for example, a bankruptcy court before other creditors, which is great. Also, in Saudi Arabia, employers must provide clean and sanitary work conditions, provide maternity leave, comply with certain working hours and holiday schedules, and so on. Looks great. Jordan, too, has a very comprehensive labor code, which is protective of workers in general, and it includes terms which stood out, like workers are not obliged to undertake work that is significantly different from that of the contract. This is very significant in the context of outside migrant laborers, because this deters fraudulent behavior from agencies in Jordan or from employers in Jordan saying, oh, we just want you to come over and do housekeeping work, while when the worker comes over, they give them substantially more stuff to do, and that's not allowed under Jordanian law. Also must provide protective working gear, wage protection, and so on. In the United Arab Emirates, you see sort of a similar story. Employers have to pay wages on time. Women are guaranteed maternity leave and equal wages to that of men for the same work. Youth labor is prohibited, and there's also wage protection. By the way, these are just terms that really stood out after reading the labor laws in these 3 countries. There are other terms in there that are also significant. Yeah, this is just a selection that we picked out. Now going on to regional frameworks. Regional frameworks, we mainly just looked at what are the important policy or directives that regional groups have created and that Uganda or these 3 Middle Eastern countries have been a part of. First is the African Union. They have the Migration Policy Framework for Africa and Plan of Action for 2018 to 2030. It's non-binding, right? There are a lot of really good policy points in here, but whether or not Uganda wants to follow them is another story. But it's good. It mirrors a lot of the stuff that we saw in the 3 Middle Eastern countries' laws, which is to provide wage protection, more fluidity between borders, and so on. You see the same story with the East African Community, with the protocol for the establishment of the EAC Common Market. This is a more economic framework, talking about currencies and so on, but there are also terms in there that try to harmonize the labor terms within the EAC community. For example, they try to harmonize the standards for professional work so that for example, a lawyer or a mechanic in one country could easily go work in another country without having to apply for a ton of different licenses, right? It's kind of mirrors what's happening in the European Union. And the Arab League has the Arab Charter on Human Rights and the Arab Declaration on International Migration. None of those are binding either. They look great, they have great terms in them, they kind of signal where countries want to go in terms of labor policy and human rights. So those were also great documents to look at, just to see, what are these countries agreeing to in general. International frameworks, the United Nations, of course, is the large body here. We have the ICRMW, which is the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families. We also have CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. All these are important documents. Then we have the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration and the Palermo Protocols. I won't get too in-depth into these documents because, again, they mirror a lot of the terms that I have already discussed before. But these are the important documents that we have chosen that we think these countries should look at when determining what are the good terms that they should follow, the BLAs and MOUs that they sign. And then the last international framework that's important is the International Labor Organization. This organization has a lot of sway over, international labor policy, and is probably the most important organization out there when it comes to labor policy in general. We looked at their 8 core conventions, which cover many areas that are important. There's a technical convention regarding migrant workers, supplementary convention, which is good to look at, and most importantly is a 1949 model agreement, which is an agreement that countries that are interested in signing bilateral labor agreements or memorandums of understanding regarding labor can look at to try to tweak around for their specific circumstances between the sending nation and the hosting nation. It's kind of old, 1949, right? Doesn't necessarily incorporate all the modern terms that we hold dear today, but is a good starting point for countries that want to get into this area and protect their labor. All right, now I'm going to hand it over to Jesse to really specifically talk about these three, the two BLAs and one memorandum of understanding that we analyzed.
Sure. So David's just done a good job of kind of laying the background sort of mesh of legal frameworks that stand behind these agreements and sort of the context in which these are negotiated. So you have the domestic labor laws, you have the regional agreements, and you have these international frameworks. And besides the domestic laws, the regional international frameworks are kind of in some ways more aspirational, and they can sort of set a set of goalposts or guidelines for countries to negotiate towards or work off of, starting point for these discussions. And so in analyzing the three agreements that Uganda has, we wanted to come up with a list of criteria that could be, we call them good practices for bilateral labor agreements, good provisions. And we use that term distinct from best practices, one, because we make no claims that these are the absolute best provisions, and two, we use provisions instead of practices because sometimes, in fact, often the reality on the ground doesn't reflect the paper terms. And we don't have or didn't have the bandwidth to investigate the reality on the ground for every labor arrangement, but we could analyze the agreements and sort of see where they line up with these international frameworks, as well as what other researchers have kind of identified as helpful in these bilateral labor agreements. So first, just a word on our methodology. There's quite a bit of research on bilateral labor agreements writ large, and specifically on the economic impact of them, but the universe of research on sort of a migrants' rights focused approach to bilateral labor agreements is significantly smaller. And within that, there's kind of a number of reports by the ILO that really take a migrants' rights approach. One author in particular, Dr. Pirasiri Wikramaseka, who we got to interview and wrote a number of these reports. And so we surveyed a wide range of research, as well as some model agreements. For instance, the State Department has a model bilateral labor agreement that can be used as a starting point for some of these negotiations. And we sort of looked at what do these different evaluation metrics have in common? What are the provisions common across all of these? And we compiled a list, knowing that no single agreement is going to meet all of these, but sort of as a starting point for analysis. So you can see in the report, we broke up the good provisions into a list of sort of three different categories, and this is used a lot in the literature, of governance categories, protection provisions, and development provisions. So governance is kind of how do the two governments work together. Protection are specific terms usually that protect migrant workers, and kind of within that is a subcategory of contract provisions. So specifically in the employment contracts offered to these migrant workers, what are some terms that can help protect them? And then thirdly, development. So this is a smaller category, but I think really important for long-term growth of these bilateral arrangements. So remittances, like the ability to send back money, repatriation, the ability to get back to your family or bring your family over, as well as like skills recognition is one that came up in a lot of the literature. So for instance, for a high-skilled worker who's traveling, do the job opportunities reflect the skills that they've developed? And for someone coming back from migrant work, do they have a chance to sort of integrate back into the Ugandan economy some of the experience they've learned? And that would create sort of a better economic arrangement between both countries to facilitate more bilateral labor. So that's kind of the third development category. And you'll see after compiling this list and kind of ranking them by what's most common across the different metrics we looked at, you can see how the agreements contain each of the provisions. And you'll notice all three agreements contain several. Some agreements, or some of these provisions are found in none of them, and then the agreements are also pretty different across each. So for instance, all of them contain some aspirational language about equal treatment and non-discrimination, which is great. Some of them contain, or one of them, the Uganda-Jordan agreement, for instance, contains a provision allowing the inspection of living and working conditions for the workers. That's not found in the other agreements. Each of the agreements kind of has unique points, but when you analyze them all together against these good provisions, you can see that the agreement with the United Arab Emirates is by far the most protective. The Jordanian agreement is pretty close to that. You can see it meets, the UAE agreement meets about 48%, or just under half of all the good provisions. The Jordanian agreement meets about 43%. And then the Saudi Arabian agreement is significantly lower than that in terms of protection. And this may just be a result of different bargaining power, or maybe different negotiation strategies. Saudi Arabia is a major destination for Ugandan workers. And so perhaps there's maybe a different felt power disparity there. But you can definitely tell a difference in these, in the protectiveness of the provisions that end up getting included in the agreements. So we kind of took two different analytical approaches. One is comparing these agreements to the list of good provisions, and the other was comparing them to the list of legal frameworks and governmental obligations that David discussed. And on both counts, you can tell sort of significant differences between the three agreements. The report goes into extreme detail on each of those, but I'll spare that from the overview. One thing I wanted to point out was the role negotiation can play in developing these agreements. So we were fortunate enough to get to compare a copy of a draft bilateral labor agreement that Uganda had been working on with Saudi Arabia with the final signed memorandum of understanding that both countries eventually signed. And one thing to note is it was drafted as a bilateral labor agreement and signed as a memorandum of understanding. So that's a difference in the sense that MOUs are typically non-binding. And so that in itself is notable. But you can also tell from just looking at the headings and the organizational structure, what dropped out and what was kept. And in the report, specifically, you can see a list of the provisions that, many of them related to what terms need to be in an employment contract that got dropped out through the negotiation process. So high-level takeaways from our research. I would say, one, that the Saudi Arabian agreement is significantly less protective than the other two. Two, that enforcement of these agreement matters. It's one thing to have a highly protective agreement in writing, and it's another thing to be able to enforce that on the ground. Third, I'll say that informing workers really matters. So a lot of the migrant laborers that end up leaving Uganda and working in these destination countries might not even know about the existence of these agreements at all. In fact, one thing notable from our research is how hard these agreements are to find in the first place. So one recommendation would be that these countries post them online or inform their workers of the laws that they're traveling under. For instance, if a worker traveled to Saudi Arabia to work in 2015 and then traveled again in 2021, the legal framework and the obligations of Saudi Arabia to that worker are totally different because one of them traveled under this agreement and the other didn't. But most of the workers have no way of knowing that. And so I think particularly for allowing self-enforcement, for allowing workers to protect their own rights as well as employers to know what they're signing up for, it's really important to get the word out about these agreements and inform the workers and employers of the legal framework they're working under. Fourth, I'll say that contracts really matter. So a lot of the most protective terms in these agreements are attached to them by way of a standard employment contract that specifies, okay, here's the minimum wage requirement or the maximum hours or sort of protective terms in the employment agreement between the employer and the migrant worker specifically. So I think those are a particular way to provide more protection for workers, especially when they're standardized. It allows both the employer and the migrant worker to know what they're getting into. And I think the final takeaway is that negotiation really matters. So as you can see, particularly in the Saudi Arabian BLA draft to the signed MOU, what happens in negotiation, what happens in the discussions between these countries really affects the outcome. And so we found some good research on sort of negotiating from a place of efficiency. So for instance, Uganda may feel like, okay, Saudi Arabia requires a lot of our workers, but there may be power mismatches depending on the part of the relationship you look at. But something that both countries are interested in is efficiency. And by providing a shared legal framework for these domestic or these migrant workers, you can create efficiencies for both countries. So it's a lot easier for Saudi Arabia to know, okay, here's the law that's going to govern these arrangements. And when there's inevitably a dispute between an employer and a worker, we already have the legal framework in place. We've already agreed with Uganda. It's not going to cause rounds and rounds of back and forth between Uganda and Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of incentive for both countries to agree on what's going to govern those arrangements, regardless of how they come out. Finally, we included in our report a list of recommendations for countries entering into these, and Uganda specifically, going forward. I'll highlight just a few. One is to really focus on enforcement. Obviously, that makes the biggest difference on the ground for these workers. So one is to incorporate more national laws, which are highly protective, into the agreements. Also easier to enforce because you have domestic courts which really understand them. Two is to impose joint and several liability. So for instance, often workers end up paying a bunch of fees to enter into these overseas employment contracts, but they end up paying them to different parties, like a recruitment agent, transportation fee, a fee to the government agency, a fee to the employer for housing. Depending on the arrangement, there could be multiple parties involved. And so to make sort of these more of one-stop shops, or to impose joint and several liability where a worker can enforce their rights against any party, I think would provide a lot more, it's something we saw in the research that would provide a lot more protection for these workers. And second, kind of as we've already discussed, I think just informing the workers would go a long way towards self-enforcement. And one of the ways we've seen this happen, particularly in other countries with high proportion of migrant laborers, is through social media and peer-to-peer channels. So I think the most obvious way would be just posting these agreements on government websites to make them more accessible, but that in turn facilitates migrant workers who are communicating with people back home and other potential migrant workers. They are suddenly informed of their rights and able to communicate them with each other. And it turns out a lot of migrant workers get their information from these peer-to-peer relationships. Finally, one recommendation would be to demand that the joint committee meets. And what I mean by that is in many of these agreements, the sending and receiving countries will establish a joint committee of members from each country to supervise the implementation of this agreement. But we've heard evidence that since these agreements are signed, these committees have never actually ended up meeting and supervising and discussing how these arrangements are going. Sort of the agreement will get finalized. Maybe there'll be an announcement to sort of tout how the government has entered into some protective agreement, and then they're never really mentioned again or supervised. And I think having ongoing supervision of this, which are baked into the language of the agreements through this joint committee, would go a long way towards implementing some of these protections. So I'll stop there. There's plenty more detail in the report. And as always, you can feel free to reach out to David or myself if you have any specific questions.
All right. Thank you very much. Lindsay for streaming that video. I think we have had an insight into the report, which will be shared in the post-event email that will be shared with all participants, as well as being posted on our website. And the video will also is being streamed live on Facebook and YouTube, and will be available after this event as well. So we're going to move into the panel discussion. I would like to invite Mr. Hilary Talemo, who is the head of external employment at the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, to talk to us about the processes in general for when a person would like to utilize this program. What processes and mechanisms are in place to combat or to curb the challenges that will be that have been discussed in that summary video. Hilary, kindly, the floor is yours. Hilary. Okay, there we go.
Thank you, Monica, and the previous speakers. Hope I'm clear.
Yes, you're very clear. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development implements a labor externalization program. This program started way back in 2005, and it's regulated by a statutory instrument, the Employment Regulations of 2005. Currently, this statutory instrument is being reviewed, and very soon we shall have a new statutory instrument in place. So basically, under this program, the ministry licenses external labor recruitment companies, and then also supervises and oversees the activities of those external labor recruitment agencies. The ministry is mandated to clear all Ugandans who are going abroad to work. Under this program, there are three ways Ugandans go abroad for work. One, you can go under a recruitment agency. You can go as an individual. There are people who source their own jobs, either through their contacts or relatives, and then they are cleared to travel for work. Then another way can be government to government. A foreign government can approach Ugandan government to supply labor for certain bilateral arrangement. But the common ones are the one placement by recruitment companies, and then the individual or migrant workers. So under this program, the ministry is mandated to ensure that before I go far, this program was introduced, one, to curb the trafficking in persons that was rampant, and also the informal ways the Ugandans were using to go abroad. So the purpose was to make this process formal so that there can be easy monitoring and knowing where the destination countries where the Ugandans were going, and so on and so on. So currently, the major destination countries where Ugandans go, of course, are, like most of you know, it's Middle East. And these countries are Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan. But majorly, especially for the category of domestic workers, it is Saudi Arabia. So in these processes, the ministry has managed to negotiate bilateral labor agreements with 3 countries so far. 1, that is Saudi Arabia, 2, Jordan, and 3, United Arab Emirates. But the Jordan bilateral agreement was suspended where it no longer clears workers to go to Jordan after the suspension of that agreement, particularly domestic workers. The reason for the suspension was that there were a lot of abuses and there were no mechanisms to address those abuses, given the fact that Uganda has no mission in the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. So currently the operational bilateral labor agreement is basically the one with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The one of UAE was signed, but it is yet to be operationalized. But still, the ministry clears workers apart from the domestic work category to work to UAE. The ministry also clears workers to work in Qatar, save for the category of domestic workers. The ministry also clears other job categories, the other Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait, save for domestic workers. So the ministry only clears domestic workers to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the reason is because it's where we have a functional bilateral labor agreement, and given the fact that the domestic work category is the most vulnerable, the government wouldn't want to send domestic workers to a country where there is no bilateral arrangement to protect the rights of migrant workers. Of course, that is not to say that with the bilateral labor agreement, the Ugandan migrant workers, especially domestic workers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, have not faced challenges. But the bilateral agreement helps to limit, and there are mechanisms to address the challenges that always come up. We are the government in the process of negotiating, having labor bilateral agreements with other countries where Ugandans are going, Qatar, Oman, and other states. I also need to mention that in Oman, the ministry does not clear domestic workers to go to Oman. However, statistics indicate that there are many Ugandans working in Oman, both as domestic workers and non-domestic workers. How they end there, I think most of the cases are human trafficking cases. So the ministry is mandated to monitor these migrant workers in the destination countries and follow up issues of those workers, working hand in hand with the missions abroad to rescue the migrant workers who are in distress, and also provide been breach of contracts. This is done in working in hand with our embassies and Ministry of Foreign Affairs in those destination countries. And the countries where we don't have missions, there are designated missions which still provide consular services in those countries. So while we don't have missions in some countries, still the mission which oversees the countries where we don't have missions always come in to help or assist the Ugandan migrant workers in distress. A lot of interventions have been introduced by the ministry in this respect of the labor. One is that to ensure that Ugandans who intend to go, especially for the domestic work category, it is a mandatory that they have to go through a licensed recruitment agency with another accredited foreign recruitment agency. Accreditation is done by our foreign missions. The purpose is to ensure that there is responsibility both on the foreign recruitment agency and on the Ugandan recruitment agency when it comes to the welfare of the migrant workers. The recruitment agencies here are not allowed to directly deploy at the employers without a third party, that is the foreign recruitment agency. So that is a measure that is intended to know it and for easy follow-up in case they have issues. And then to apportion responsibility. These companies do not stop at taking people. They are supposed, together with the government, of course, it's a mutual responsibility to follow up the migrant workers and know where they are and where they have had challenges, to have them either repatriated or find alternative employment elsewhere where there have been some abuse, and also to ensure that the migrant workers get justice where there have been abuse of their rights or breach of their contract terms. I listened to the testimony of the victim, what she went through. It was a painful ordeal, but eventually she said when she went to the mission, she was helped. That's how you. I don't know. She did not mention whether she came back. She approached the ministry to help her recover what she had lost or even the money that was not paid. The ministry has a complaints mechanism where such cases, where someone comes back when they have lost either their property or they have not been paid their salary. If you come to the ministry and report, we follow up with the company that was responsible, and we task them to follow up with the partner agency in the destination country, one, to recover the property and also to ensure that the arrears are paid. If that is not done by the foreign agency, then the responsibility usually falls on the recruitment agents back home. The responsibilities of the ministry when it comes to the issue of labor externalization. Of course, the ministry was also supposed to carry out awareness campaigns to ensure that the Ugandan population know the proper channels of being externalized, so that they don't fall into the hands of human traffickers. They also sanction the recruitment agencies that have breached their terms of the license, or they have operated in a way that facilitates the exploitation or abuse of the migrant workers. The externalization program, I must say that it has had challenges and it has also had benefits. While some Ugandans take this whole slavery that we are promoting modern day slavery. We disagree that this is not modern day slavery. Obviously, there have been some challenges, but that is not to disabuse the whole sector. Because the ministry, on average, clears 2,000 to 5,000 people every month to go abroad. So this indicates that first of all, the unemployment rate high is here. So people have, if opportunities avail themselves outside this country, provided they are decent and dignified, and people can access those opportunities and be able to work either to improve their livelihoods and also to support their families back home. So over time, the remittances that come from these migrant workers are very high. On average, these migrant workers annually, they remit home US dollars 900 million. So that shows how the migrant workers benefit, and also the relatives in one way or another, the people. From our statistics, we also note, especially in the case of the domestic workers, maybe this is where we need the gender activists. I think 70% of the ladies who go abroad, most of them are single mothers. They are going to work to be able to provide for their families back home. But the challenges the program faces, mainly one, labor agreement, for instance, an operation one with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we continue to receive challenges, to receive complaints of rights abuse of migrant workers, and it seems there is no mechanism of settling such cases in the destination country. Everything comes back home, while the purpose of the bilateral agreement is to ensure that there is a complaints handling mechanism back in the destination country where there is breach of contract, where there is abuse of rights of migrant workers, so that there is a redress mechanism. But it appears it's not effective in this case, as every complaint comes back either to our mission or to back home to the ministry. In an ideal situation, the Ministry of Labor in the destination country should have a mechanism to ensure that migrant workers' rights. So that's the challenge we have, meaning the bilateral agreement has not achieved the intended purpose. Of course, another challenge we have is that there are always limited resources in terms of both of manpower and finance, because the ministry is mandated to regularly conduct monitoring visits to these destination countries, assess the working conditions of Ugandan migrant workers, and perhaps inform policy back home. But where you don't have resources and you maybe visit the destination country once in 3 years or once in 2 years, then the monitoring is not effective and you are not able to inform policy. basing on factual issues on the ground. You instead end up relying on the goodwill. That's also another challenge. And of course, another challenge the sector faces, poor publicity. Once a video of someone who is suffering or who has been tortured goes viral, the whole program is discredited. But as I told you, if you look at the numbers of the people who go and also the people who get challenges, the percentage is minute. But as they say, the bad news always spreads faster than the good news. So the poor negative publicity and discredit this sector despite the benefits and some people. You can also see in this case, we have a testimony of a victim of someone maybe who went through well and was able to use the mechanisms in place to be helped wherever they were. So in brief, that's the labor externalization sector. One, it has created employment opportunities given the high unemployment levels here back home. People have improved their livelihoods here and there, and so on. So Monica, I hand back to you there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Talemwa, for those insights. I would like to request that we hold off any questions until the end of the event, or perhaps we could post them in the Q&A. There's a Q&A platform just at the bottom there, and we shall attend. Now I'm going to invite Ms. Agnes Igoye to give us the perspective from Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Coordination Office for Prevention of Trafficking in Persons, where she is the deputy coordinator. Agnes, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope I can be heard because I am traveling in northern Uganda. I'm just traveling from Karamoja to Tororo. So I stopped by the roadside in some coffee place to be able to do this.
Yes,
So I hope I'm audible. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, and thank you, Hilary, and everybody else, who spoke. Like I've been introduced, I am the Deputy National Coordinator, Prevention of Trafficking in Persons under Ministry of Internal Affairs. This is a creation, the office created under Section 21 of the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act. This office is of coordination, monitoring, and overseeing the act itself. And we do not work in isolation. As you can imagine, issues of trafficking, cut across. That's why under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Permanent Secretary heads a task force. Many of the people in here, I can see members of the task force. We have Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, we have internal security organization and external, we have local government officials, we have ODPP because we need to prosecute. We also have Uganda Police and several others. We also have a representation from the NGOs. The NGOs, thank you very much. You support us a lot, especially on victim and assistance in terms of shelters and rehabilitation work. And in that office, we are also charged with the developing the National Action Plan, which we do it collaboratively with the task force as well, and different stakeholders they are in, and also engaging in consultation with NGOs, any actors who are dealing in this. We initiate training and awareness among government officials, but also with the communities, especially, for example, I've just been in Karamoja, to do with the, children in Karamoja, and also in trafficking cases. Some of them include child marriage and all. But because today we are concentrating more on labor externalization, so I'll restrict, my responses, therein. First of all, I think looking at the whole genesis of how labor externalization, started. If the people who were there at that time, it started from sending people to Iraq by American government, okay? And then as security turned, so many people jumped into the sectors, including traffickers. And when they did, like Hillary said, because a lot of abuses, a lot of challenges and complaints came up. So government came in, to actually, license agencies. I think that's the best thing that has happened to Uganda in this program. At least it helps, because when I look at the cases of human trafficking, the majority of the cases actually happen outside, the labor externalization. But unfortunately, when you talk about labor externalization in Uganda, many people jump into, they think it is trafficking. And so it is really an opportunity and constant to separate. And it doesn't mean that labor externalization is free of abuses, just like you had Hillary. I'll also talk, hint on some of them. But at least we need to clean, that sector to make sure that to channel that information so that people go to those rightful places. Unfortunately, right now, if we hear that we have only one functional labor agreement with Saudi Arabia, so many people are going to those other countries without BLAs. And there's a lot of abuse, especially with the domestic workers. I think the reason why is because, first of all, globally, domestic work, some of the countries don't recognize it as work. It is demeaning, and people don't pay, a lot of attention. It's one of those occupations where women are paid less. Even in our own homes in Uganda here, when you talk about what they call house girls, even the name itself, I keep telling people, when you hear, if it is a man cooking, they'll call him a chef. Okay, and they'll be paid more. Some people can invite chefs to their homes; they pay them more. But with your domestic paid, it's not even the naming itself. Instead of calling domestic, worker, the name house girl itself is demeaning. In several places. But if I may, apart from recruitment agencies, before I get into the challenges also in this sector, I think also the good thing that happened is that the government, the creation of the law itself, and the strength of the law, if implemented, talks a lot about support to survivors, protection, assistance, and support. It talks about the right to be recognized, as a survivor or as a victim, the right to repatriation. And under our office, we work, when it's a recruitment agency, it's actually much more helpful because it is easier. Because what we do, we liaise with the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. We liaise with our embassies abroad. We recognize, we liaise, because Ministry of Gender and Labor and Social Development will know, then you are accountable, and then return becomes easier. Those mechanisms become easier, but the majority do not go through recruitment agencies, and yet they are going for labor. So that's a challenge. Some of them go in secret because of the way they are recruited. And believe it or not, the biggest recruiters are relatives, are friends to relatives, are friends, to somebody known to these survivors, and then they go, which becomes also a challenge on reintegration. So we are seeing those challenges, even conflict within families, because of that when that happens. In rehabilitation, we are also seeing that the law also caters for non-discrimination, which is a good thing. And then they are not supposed to be charged with the crimes committed. We train our law enforcement, for example, immigration, when they have fraudulent documents, they're not supposed to be punished. Some of them, when they engage them in sexual exploitation and you find them, you have to recognize them as officers also started to send immigration attaches to missions abroad. I know that there's Abu Dhabi, there's Pretoria, there's South Africa, in South Africa, there's also Copenhagen, there's also USA, and we are hopeful, so that they can also help, especially with regard also to migration issues and supporting Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, and also the embassy. We are also seeing the role of our embassies, if you recall, during COVID-19 and all that. So International Organization for Migration, supported through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Gender, Social and Labor Development, brought over 200, survivors. So that was also really, really helpful. But as I speak about what government is doing, I'm also aware that the biggest challenge we have is limit or lack of rehabilitation centers, because NGOs, support us a lot in this. I know that police, for example, but they are not enough, but mostly internally. But also those which cater for external are limited. So there's a huge challenge in there. But I also met, I'm also advised by, I know, 30 survivors of human trafficking. And when our office met with 30 of them, they also told us, the challenges. Some of them were from Saudi Arabia, others went to different countries, Jordan, even countries where Uganda didn't have bilateral labor agreements. But this is what they also say, that there's so much money they pay to recruitment agencies. And so, because if there are no bilateral agreements, are not, and also to look at that, because they are talking about 1 million to 5 million. So when they get there and there are challenges therein, they expect them to pay the money back in case they want to return. They are also talking about delays, to be taken to work after they've met all the requirements. So those delays also, of course, recruitment agencies also had a challenge during happening. But they also reported retention of their travel documents, not just by companies abroad, but also the ones they are waiting to externalize. And if they want to withdraw their departures, or they don't want to go anymore, they were retaining travel documents. So that's why I also had to mention that during one of my media briefings. And I'm happy to report that the recruitment agencies are actually returning, because a passport is a right, but also they are not supposed to retain them without the knowledge of the Directorate of Citizenship and Immigration Control. So I'm happy that they are complying, because the most important thing, if it is a recruitment agency, then we know where to go, we know where to start from, which is good. But if it is not, it is always a challenge. Some people come and recruit in a hotel and disappear. Some people don't even know, who took them and who recruited. There's also recruitment over social media, which is a challenge, because it is your friend and then the account disappears abroad. Survivors have also reported about lack of food, not enough food. And as our survivor talked today, of course, moving you from home to home, something which is not even in a contract. She talked about that already. But they're also reporting challenges, from their families when they return, because some of them return with nothing or after exploitation. But families expect them, because they went abroad, to return with something. So the awareness really has to go around, as they resettle, back home in there. I also know that, several, organizations and NGOs have helped us a lot, especially in rehabilitation work. Even I know that also ODPP and police. Now, the fact that we use ODPP works collaboratively with the police, it is also helping a lot, even with the cases, and making sure that you to survivor protection. The more we train our law enforcement officers, it is helping, a lot. I see Monica, I've seen you training a lot, thank you. And also other Angel Lydia, so there's a lot, being done with the collaboration. And I must say that the collaboration we have in Uganda, when I listen, within the region, we enjoy that a lot. And I want to thank all the stakeholders here because as a coordination office, you support, our work a lot. We support survivors, and also to acknowledge where we have gaps, we acknowledge them and make sure that, we support each other in the process. So I know that time might be up, because I also know that on incidents, because maybe just to talk about, when we look at our 2020, report, there are 95, incidents on transnational, because also COVID-19 has restrained some of the movements, because especially during the first lockdown, but we are seeing that a lot of trafficking right internal, especially with sexual exploitation, of children and all that. But of course, eyes right now are on external. And I like the presentation I saw earlier. I know I was on the road, but I could see the analysis of bilateral agreements. But I'm also happy to report that under the IGAD, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, we are also getting the model agreement, because negotiating as a bloc is going to be much more helpful than that unequal relations during negotiations. So I hope, having those regional approaches are also going to help us, to move forward. So Monica, I think let me stop here. I'm grateful that this connection, has worked, and back to you. And thank you very much, everybody. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Agnes, for that discussion. Yes, I think we need to have a lot of cleanup done to make this policy actually, because yes, it is very important for our economy to be able to provide jobs for the large number of youth joining the workforce every year. We need to have a way for them to safely earn an income. So now I'm going to invite Lydia Buite, who is going to give us the CSO perspective on matters regarding labor export and labor externalization. Lydia? Lydia, we cannot hear you. Could you check your... Okay, as we wait for Lydia to set up, yes, Agnes talked about building confidence in the labor externalization policy, and the fact that many Ugandans now, when we talk about labor export, or we talk about going for jobs abroad, it has sort of a negative ring to it. There's a lot that needs to be done to reverse that thinking. And and also to encourage people to move openly. So much migration is done in secret or quietly as possible. Cultural challenges that we have as a community that need to be addressed. So I see Lydia is back on. Okay, great.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
you. Okay, thank you. So, my network is really bad. I hope that I can be heard. Allow me to speak when my camera is off, so that perhaps I can maximize on the network. I'm not sure if that works either way. So, Monica, can you hear me? Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you so much, the organizers, for this particular engagement. Thank you to our previous speakers. Analysis of the sector, and then our two speakers from the government ministries, that is Mr. Hillary and Agnes. It's always nice to hear from you people first, before us CSOs that supplement government efforts, we come in to also give our perspective on the issues of migrant labor in Uganda. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So I will quickly give just what is the perspective of the sector. Hillary, I totally sympathize with you when you say that mostly the sector has been named as though it is facilitating modern day slavery by the population. I think we just need to appreciate where the population is coming from, why the sector, which actually is providing alternative solutions to the very bulging unemployment levels to the country, is being named that way. It's because of the different challenges that are within this particular sector. But before anything, I want to note that first and foremost is that migration is a factor of life, and it is not a problem. And because it's a factor of life, governments, civil society organizations, development partners, academia, activists at the different levels, we have to work together effectively to manage this factor of life. You know, when you're managing something as a factor of life, problem, you are working towards to eliminate that problem. But when you manage a factor of life, you manage it in a manner to ensure that it effectively, this factor of life effectively serves the purpose for which it ought to be. So we need to be able to start from that particular angle. And I personally, I want to note that I don't look at labor migration as modern day slavery. No, it has been here and it will be here. Why do I say it will be here? It will be here because already Hillary has told us the issues of unemployment. And these are the challenges, the key development challenges as a country, Uganda, we are challenged with. We have a very young population, but which is not being matched with employment, so that we are able to benefit from this particular demographic. But with this particular program of labor migration, it comes in as are able to get employment. So therefore, it is not a bad program. It is not, by the way, the policy, the implement policy says it's a temporary measure. I've always said, actually, it is not a temporary measure because there is no point in life where every country is going to have a very self-sustaining economy that is able to employ all its citizens in their totality. So because of that other fact, it means that such a program cannot be called a temporary program. No, it can only be called, it is the other program through which people are able to get employment. So if we looked at this labor migration program from that particular angle, then we'll be able to understand. And for us in the CSO, what we are always calling upon, we are calling upon the government as, of course, the duty bearer to now, in order to manage this factor of life, which is labor migration, for those people who cannot find employment within the country, it means that as a government, there is need to ensure that at all the 4 stages of labor migration, they are well managed, they are effectively managed. And what is the effectiveness of management of this? Of course, there has to be a robust legal framework for the 4 stages of labor migration to be managed: the pre-migration, the migration stage itself, the destination, or what we call arrival stage, and then the return stage. All those stages must be effectively and comprehensively be managed. And of course, the government has to first manage them legislatively, setting up a robust policy and legal framework for such a program, that whoever is operating in it knows very well the parameters of operation. If once it is well managed, then it will be backed up by, another robust and comprehensive monitoring system. Now, this monitoring system, for me, I always say that the monitoring we talk about, and us as CSOs that we have always, shared with our colleagues in government, it is not the monitoring of getting on a plane, I go to Saudi Arabia, I come back. Or I've seen a few, because you only sample, you can't go to all the workers. But a robust and comprehensive monitoring system has to be anchored in the 4 stages of migration, because at every stage, this labor migrant needs protection. Whether it is at the pre-migration stage, they need protection. They need protection from the unscrupulous people who may take advantage of them. They need protection to ensure that they are able to make an informed decision before they travel. That will allow them to make that particular informed decision about their movement or their labor migration options that they take. When you go into the movement stage, they need protection in the recruitment process. Are there policies that are managing or that are regulating the recruitment companies? Are these recruitment companies, practicing ethical recruitment practices? Of course, this one, Odette will have a clear discussion and say, we can't have they may not roll out on ethical recruitment practices at a go, but we need to have proper systems that already are forward-looking into that direction, that the companies in Uganda are bound to practice ethical recruitment practices in this particular movement stage, in the arrival stage. So the monitoring system ideally has to be anchored when they come back, that they are reintegrated back into the community. There are people who come back when they even have health issues, mental health issues, and these are a growing trend. The monitoring system should also be able to look beyond, to be able to give us trends around this labor migration. For example, Mr. Hillary shared and said, yes, the government suspended the Jordan agreement or MOU in whatever format it is. It was suspended, and therefore we take it that the government is not clearing anyone to go and work in Jordan. But you see the trend now is that the recruitment companies in Saudi Arabia are recruiting, and actually they are deploying in Jordan, because we focus as Platform for Labor Action. We have cases where currently we are working on a case where a person was recruited that they are going to Saudi Arabia. Waiting Saudi Arabia, they were taken to Jordan, and there they have got challenges. Now they have driven them back into Saudi Arabia. So there are trends. So this system should know those trends, and the monitoring system then should be able to give us even analytical reports around the sector. That way, we would have built what we call a safety net around this program, that the people who are participating in it, they are benefiting from it, that the government is benefiting from it, that the destination countries are benefiting from it, that everyone involved in it is actually benefiting from this particular program. So it is very important that we look at the 4 stages of migration, because yes, we know that labor migration in the country is really good. It is providing alternative employment. When I was listening to the young lady when she was giving her story, I really felt sorry for her, because she has gone to look for money, but instead she's again coming back when she's being assaulted. She's facing all challenges. The other issue that we have to look at is the issue of enforcement of the bilateral agreements or the MOUs, but now the contracts that are signed between the migrant and this particular employer. Taking an example of people who are going to work as domestic workers. Remember, these are people's private homes. And what I didn't see in the video or the analysis, hopefully maybe in the detailed one is there, is have we looked at actually the kafala system that is within the Gulf countries, that where we are seeing most of our young men and women actually going to work or they seek employment. That kafala system has way and far-reaching impact on how this particular contract of employment can be enforced, because it is a sponsorship system. And because it's a sponsorship system, it actually creates an environment of, I have control over you, and without me, you are nothing in this. As long as we're foreigner in the Gulf countries. Some countries are trying to be a bit liberal, but I mean, this system is still there. And when you look at Saudi Arabia, the kafala system is very much alive. So there are things that we also need to look into when we are negotiating and ensure that they are at the back of our mind, and how best do we negotiate. For example, clauses on mutual legal assistance clauses within the bilateral agreement, that if there is a dispute between an employee and an employer, should the government of Uganda need to be able to be supported, the other government will be able to support the legal processes. Well, I'm not sure, because like the video, the analysis shows, the bilateral agreements are not posted online. They are not like public documents. Yes, they ought to be public, but they are not per se public. So we need to have all that documented in order for us, this migrant worker. Because at all, by the way, even if you are a technocrat, when you're in a different country, you are literally vulnerable in one way or the other. So it's important that we look into it. The other aspect, of course, where we have to look into is that as a country, we are majorly externalizing labor into very high risk sectors. So when you externalize labor into high risk sectors or vulnerable sectors, which we call vulnerable sectors, like domestic workers all over the world, we know that they are vulnerable and marginalized workers. And the factors that make them vulnerable and marginalized, we all know them, that they are working in private homes, which are not regularly monitored by even if the law, a state had the best monitoring system, monitoring domestic workers in private homes. It is not something that is very easy. So all these are challenges that the system, the program is facing. Of course, the robust monitoring system cannot be effected if the staffing within the labor acceleration program is not enough or is not adequate. And with staffing, I refer to, we need to have labor liaison officers in the countries of destination, but just not one labor liaison officer. When you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, we have Saudi Arabia, in terms of square miles and everything, is bigger than the whole of East Africa combined. So if it is bigger than the whole of East Africa combined, I can imagine a young lady from my village, Kamuli, negotiating to move from Jeddah and negotiate herself to end up into Riyadh, where we have our embassy. Of course, it is difficult. It will be difficult for this person to be able to do that. So what does that then mean? It means that the government should be able to appoint Arabia, for example, and any other country where we enter into. For example, we have an MOU with UAE. So UAE also has different states. But if you only put labor liaison officer in one state and there is only one person, they will not be effective. So we need the adequate staffing for this monitoring system to work. Even coming back home here, the external unit, which is being headed by Hillary now as we speak, he knows very well that not long ago when they had a team of 5 people, thanks at least now they have increased in number, but a team of 5 people externalizing 5,000 workers every day. How do you expect them to do any other thing in terms of monitoring? They cannot. So yes, we have seen and we appreciate the fact that the government has actually gone on and gradually kept on increasing the staffing within the unit itself. But because when you look at its remittances, it's bigger than any other product that we export. You know, people don't want to say that we export labor, but you know, when you use the word remittance, remittances come from an export. So we never want to say we export labor, and yet we use the word remittance. But those remittances are bigger than any other export that Uganda actually puts out there. So if they are bigger than that, then it is a sector worth looking into and being able, and the government having deliberate move to ensure that it's well streamlined, well managed, and effectively protective of the participants who are the migrant workers, but of course also protect even perhaps the business people who are supporting the entire process around it. We also have another issue when we talk about the legal and policy framework. Uganda, as we speak, we still have our national migration policy has remained in. Wondered, why has this document remained in draft? Because if as a country we don't have a comprehensive policy framework that is guiding or giving us guiding principles for the legal framework, then it means that we still have a long way to go. Yes, we have the acts of parliament, but a comprehensive, because the intention of when this national migration policy, the draft one, was being developed, behind it was that we need something that consolidates all that is regarding about migration. So we also need such documentation to be there, and perhaps for such policy frameworks to be able to adequately articulate the different migration partners that we have as a country, whether it is forced migration, labor migration, all those to be, for this one, they are well articulated, and then the acts of parliament will keep on guiding and so into this particular policy. So we have a lot as CSOs to talk about. Of course, at the return, asked whether the survivor, when she was giving her testimony, whether she has approached the Ministry of Gender. Perhaps she doesn't even know. And why doesn't she know? Because information. They need to have information. once the citizens feel that the government is protective of us, I'm telling you, they will come running. Let me tell you, in that lady's testimony, yes, she was able to go to the embassy. And she tells you, yes, UN came in and she was able to be helped to come back. But is she yet confident of the service delivery of the government, especially within this particular labor migration? So we need to create particular program. They are beautiful services, because here will remind me of the cases we have worked on, and actually they have been successful at the end of the day. They are beautiful services, but people need to know about these services so that then they are able to use them. When they come back, now she's back, I'm sure she's now, of course, being helped by an non-government organization. But we don't have government, oriented and resourced centers where such people can be comprehensively rehabilitated, because a non-government organization has financial constraints. And I know also government also has financial constraints, but for it, it's a bit different. It has financial constraints that how long can I rehabilitate this person? When you go to the clinical social support, they will tell you this person maybe needs 6 months sexual support, but the project you have can only support her for 1 month. So it means that even when she goes back into the, there are some people committing suicide, some people doing all sorts of things as a result of participating in this particular program. So we are taking big strides as a country in terms of ensuring that we go in the right way of streamlining the sector, but we still have some way to go. And that some way to go, it should be very comprehensive, triangulating at every stage, and knowing that at every stage we have enough protective mechanism, we have enough regulation mechanism, we have enough from that angle. I don't know how much time I have to speak. If you don't stop me, I'll speak until when we finish this meeting. So Monica, please let me know if I can speak or not.
Lydia, I think I'll give you just 3 more minutes to wrap up.
Yes, yes, I had to warn you, because I love this sector. It's so dear to me, because I believe that it is a sector that can actually do wonders for the young people who are really struggling. And of course, the other bit I can also talk about is that the government needs now to also looking out into other sectors, other skilled sectors, where skilled manpower is externalized, as opposed only to externalizing unskilled labor, because I call it unskilled. Yes, they will say the domestic workers have undertake pre-departure orientation training, but the pre-departure orientation training, if you look at it from the actual sense under the law, it is not the skilling. It isn't the skilling. It is just that this person is going. We just need to prep this person before they depart. So we need the government also to be looking out and negotiating and signing actual bilateral agreements for skilled labor, because we have skilled labor. I interfaced with this, and a degree holder has decided they are going to work, they're going to go and work as a domestic worker. But at the back of her mind, and even you as a facilitator, you know for sure that this young person, they will never put this work that they have worked as a domestic worker on their CV, so that they are able to advance in their career. That is the challenge. And of course, I saw in the situational analysis that was presented, showing that why people are leaving because of the poor pay within the country. That someone says and say, you know what, let me go. Instead of me as a teacher, a qualified teacher, being here, earning 400,000, let me go and work as a domestic worker, and I earn 850,000 Uganda shillings. So that also, at it, are we able to externalize skilled labor, and that it is paid as skilled labor? and they are able to earn from it. So, and when they go as skilled labor, they are able to go and even advance in their career. When they come back, they can never use the 2 years of work that they have worked on their CV. No, they can't use it. Why? Because they can't just, there will be a discrepancy between the two. You're a social worker or you are a teacher, you work as a domestic worker. Those two, someone will be looking at it differently. So we need the government also to be able to be negotiating really skilled labor. Monica, back to you.
Okay, wow, thank you so much, Lydia. You have posed quite a number of questions that hopefully we shall begin the conversation on. We are aware that this event will not be sufficient to address all the issues that are being raised or to answer all the questions that are being posed. But I think we can begin the conversation and continue with this conversation in other platforms. So now I'm going to hand over to, I'm going to invite Miss Odette Sarboli, who is a representative from IOM, to talk to us about best practices in migration and matters concerning labor migration. Odette, you're welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Monica. I would like also to express my warm greeting to the other speakers. Thank you also for Willow International for extending an invitation to IAM, the UN Agency for Migration. We are very pleased to be part of this discussion. This is our daily work. As you said, my name is Odette Sarboli. I'm a labor mobility. You have asked me to talk about the best practices when it comes to labor migration. Maybe before getting into that, I will just reiterate Lydia's word, just to say that labor migration is not a problem to solve. It's a reality to manage. And its management, as you said it, require a multi-stakeholder approach, both in countries of origin as in countries of destination. And that's one of the reasons why countries get into signing bilateral labor agreement. I have seen one of the questions where one of the participants, I think it is those online, asking what are the difference between the BLA and the MOU. Maybe I will start from there. We have this big umbrella of what we call the Bilateral Labor Migration Agreement, BLMA. And under this BLMA, you have different categories. You have the BLA that are more legally binding and that are more difficult to negotiate. We have also people need to understand that BLA takes time to be negotiated and they are legally binding. And what it means is that two countries that signed the BLA, they should also get it endorsed by their respective parliaments. So it's a long process. That's why sometimes, and as it is legally binding, the majority of countries of destination are not very keen to negotiate BLA. That's why they ended up negotiating MOU, that as the two researchers has mentioned it, they are not legally binding. And most of the time, they are also very poor when it comes to protection. Unfortunately, when the majority of our countries, because when I speak about labor migration, I always put myself as an African that I am, and also as someone who comes from developing countries. Because when our countries mainly good position of force, because the others, if it is not migrant workers from Africa, they can always turn to other countries, such as Philippines or the Asian country, where also they provide the same profile of job of workers that they are looking for. Nevertheless, we still have a power bargain, and that's why international organizations like IAM and ILO, we are always advocating for countries of origin to try to sign BLAs because it comes stronger with the protection aspect. However, even if countries have decided to go to sign MOU, there's always room for negotiating to ensure that the protection of the migrant workers' rights are included and implemented. Generally speaking, if you look at all these BLA and this MOU, they are not that bad. Even the MOU, it comes to protection. But the main issue is the implementation. It's the same for the migrant workers contract. I have seen copies of migrant workers, domestic migrant workers contract from Uganda. They have everything that we are talking about. Now the only issue is the implementation. And now that's where it's very crucial for every country that is engaged in this BLA to ensure that this joint steering committee that comes with BLA and MOU are implemented. Because when countries sign MOUs or BLA, they always agree to have this joint steering committee. This is not necessary monitoring, but it's a monitoring mechanism that allows them to address all the issues that have happened during a period of time and see how they can address it. It's true that Hillary has told us that in Saudi, which is currently the most that Uganda is implementing, the Saudi government does not have this complaint mechanism. But I do believe that if the Joint Steering Committee was working properly, Uganda will be in the position to put the complaint that they have been receiving, because currently now all the complaints are coming back home and nothing is done. They could have, at least those Joint Steering Committee were working properly. Definitely they could have brought on the table those issues that they are facing in the context of the implementation of this BLA. I think we need, the government necessarily need to find ways of implementing those joint steering committee, mainly now that they are negotiating, they are in the process of negotiating other BLA or MOU with other countries. These joint steering committee need, or every 2 years, once every 2 years, they need to happen because a lot happens to this migrant worker. And as Lija was saying it, monitoring is key in this business. And the monitoring, I know when we talk about monitoring, we are always thinking in countries of destination, but we need to monitor this sector. We need definitely to monitor this sector, even in countries of origin, because a lot of happen during the employment, during the recruitment phase. Because as Lija was saying, generally speaking, the labor migration process is on 4 steps. You have the recruitment, deployment, employment phase, and the return or onward migration. And when countries are negotiating BLAs, they need also to have clauses on return and reintegrations. I'll just give a very good example from countries in the Fiji's island that have managed to MOU. It's not an MOU, it's not a BLA. Some very clear clause on return and reintegration of the Fiji migrant worker. After they have finished their contract, before even returning, they have reskilled. They are provided skillings and they come up with some financial support that will help them to reintegrate in the field or sector in Fiji that they have already identified prior even to their return in country. So these are things that are happening elsewhere that can be also replicated. Because if return and reintegration should not only be for those who are victims of exploitation. There are some that, as Ilaria has been mentioning it, there are many success stories in this industry. There are some that have come up with a lot of knowledge. I will just give one example that I got from our partner in URA. There was the family in which she is working. They are actually manufacturing milk into cheese. So she has gained that techniques there because she has been supporting them in doing this transformation of milk into cheese, goat cheese, and other products. So she has finished her contract, she has come back, and she has returned because her plan now is to collect enough funding so that she will come back and open her small enterprise to start transforming milk. And because we know we have a lot of milk here in Uganda into cheese that she can start now be selling. So there is also this knowledge that people are gaining, but if there is nothing that is already put in place for them to facilitate their reintegration, not only their return, but their reintegration in the society, because no matter what, any migration journey will have come to an myself, we will be returning to our different countries of origins, and we will be returning with a lot of knowledge. And so that knowledge should not only help us, but it should also help our country, our communities where we are from. Now, coming back to the good practices, I will not go very far. I will not be citing any other country, though people do not feel it currently, but lots of things, lots of positive things are currently happening in Uganda in this sector. I will start with the pre-departure orientation. There have been pre-departure orientation training for migrant workers, mainly for domestic workers. But the ministry has noticed that it was not enough because it was not covering many key areas that migrant workers need to know and understand before even leaving his or her country of origin. So that's why we have just finalized a new pre-departure orientation training, holistic, because the previous one we had was more focusing on domestic workers, and it was lacking a big component when we talk about migrant workers' rights. That is the rights of migrant workers, to allow them to know what are their rights and their obligations. But not only that, the new pre-departure orientation training manual will give them also better insight of the laws and regulation, not only in Uganda, but in the countries of destination. Because sometimes these migrant workers that are going mainly in the Gulf states, they do not know really what are the regulation and what are the law there. I will just give us a very dramatic example that we have heard about recently. Ugandan migrant workers who have been deployed in this Arabic country has killed accidentally, I will say, her boss. The law that we have there. And when we talk about the Sharia law, what it means is that if you kill, you are killed. So unfortunately, it's in Saudi. The Saudi recently informed that they will kill her because she has gone through trial. Unfortunately, no one was there. And that's when I really support the idea of robust monitoring mechanism that Lydia was mentioning. She has gone through trial. She was judged in a foreign language. All the discussion was in Arabic. She does not speak Arabic. She had a designated lawyer who was speaking Arabic. At the end of the day, the sentence was, you will be killed. No one was there to defend her law. So the only information we get was when the decision on the sentence was already made. So this means that there was a real lack of monitoring of the case of that lady. And I will go even beyond, maybe those kind of country, if you kill someone, you will be killed. That's why we really insist on the need of migrant workers to know their rights, but to also know their obligation, to know the law that in which they have to abide. Because when they are recruited, it's the Ugandan regulation that apply to them. But once in countries of destination, they also need to know the rules, regulation, and the law that prevent, so that they can better be compliant to avoid the case I have just mentioned. So this is the kind of work also, and a good practice that we hope that when the industry embrace it, it will be very helpful. So to really train, because what we have noticed in the past is that, yeah, everyone was saying, yeah, we are training this migrant worker, but sometimes it was just 3 days training, maximum 5 days trainings. Larry, I really hope that with this new pre-departure orientation training manual, they will make it mandatory for all the approved and certified training centers to train these migrant workers for 14 days. It's not skilling, because it's still different. And I agree with Lydia that pre-departure orientation is not skilling. Skilling is another area that I will also touch upon. But the pre-departure, we need to take it seriously. And we are also working, as I am, with our other missions in these countries of destination, mainly in the Gulf, so that also these migrant workers, when they arrive, they can benefit from a post-arrival orientation. This is also very, very important. The other good practice that is happening currently in Uganda, but maybe many people are not aware, is that we are working also with the Ugandan Association of. So what we are doing concretely is that we are building the capacity of the private recruitment agency, those who are licensed by the ministry, on ethical recruitment. Lydia has mentioned it just in her intervention. So far, we have trained private recruitment agencies, licensed one. More than 75 of them have been already trained on ethical recruitment. And when we talk about ethical recruitment, it addresses the issue that Agnes has been mentioning. That is the retention of the passport. I always tell the PRAs, the private recruitment agencies, that passport is a personal document. Even in some cases, during the recruitment process, 10 of them didn't know that migrant workers should provide consent form to company to hold that. I also go further by telling them, and these are part of the standard, because this ethical recruitment comes with standard and principle. And it's based on 7 standard and principle. And one of them is also, even when they have to collect their personal data, they need a consent form. And also they have to make them understand that their data will not be shared by only to those that are relevant in the recruitment process. The majority of them were not doing it, but now they have started doing it. And I think that's one of the reasons why now they are even handing over the passport, because I told them, you think that holding the passport can force a migrant worker to be externalized by all means, because they already, as Lydia was saying, it's sponsored, so the employer pays all the recruitment process. In an ideal world, that's what we are promoting, to avoid the debt bondage of migrant workers. In many countries, you will see a migrant worker who is externalized, who spend more than 9 months of salary paying the debt of her recruitment or his recruitment. That's why we are promoting employer pays principle. When I arrived in Uganda last year, there was a kind of misinterpretation of employer pays principle. Many people are thinking that if an employer covers the entire recruitment fees, it means that you have been sold. I think that's why even the term of modern slavery was coming from, but not at all. And I always tell people, myself as a UN worker, when I have been recruited to Uganda, all my recruitment process, including my deployment to Uganda, have been covered by the UN. This doesn't mean that I have been sold, not at all. Even my medical, I have been reimbursed by the UN, because that's the employer pays principle, so that the migrant worker does not end up in a debt bondage area. And we need, and this brings me to the need of information, the right information. Because when I have been interacting with these private recruitment agencies, I have come up to notice, because we have been organizing lots of training. And sometimes, you know, it is in the hotel, you can see those waiters coming in and coming out. And whenever we finish a training session, those waiters will come to me and say, okay, I would like to be externalized. Do you have a company? And for me, the reflection that it triggers in me is that, okay, if people that are in Kampala, that are somehow more exposed, are not aware of the right and safe migration pathway, and does not know who are the key actors, let alone a young lady who is sitting somewhere in Acholi region or anywhere else. Because we need, and what does this mean? It means that we need to do more community outreach, explain people what are the safe and regular migration pathway that the government is the stakeholders and partners has put in place. That information has to reach everyone. That's why what we are planning to do, that I consider also a good practice, in collaboration with the Minister of Gender, Labor and Social Development, we'll be embarking in a kind of widespread training, capacity building of government counterpart, not only officials from the Minister of Gender, Labor and Social Development, but also all the other ministries. We have seen Agnes here in this. Agnes have a key interest in all this labor migration, though maybe she will be seeing it in the angle of trafficking, but definitely they are key actors. When we talk about ethical recruitment, I'm sure people like Agnes, they would like to know, okay, what does this mean and how it applies to my daily job? The same way the LC5 or LC3 who is sitting somewhere in any of these districts, because I'm not very familiar with the district name, so I will not venture, but that is sitting, who is sitting in any of these districts, he would also, we need also to make him understand what is ethical recruitment, how labor migration pathway of the ladies and the boys in his community. So that's why we'll be embarking in the kind of community outreach as well as the capacity building of all the majority, at least, of the government counterpart, both at the national and at the local level. So this is, but we have been a little bit delayed because of the current COVID lockdown, but this is also something that we'll be embarking in. We are also planning to work with the COC. I know Lydia is here from a platform for labor action, but we need also to bring more COC on this narrative because sometimes people there is a not only the COC but even the media. Why the media? Because as Hilary has mentioned it, Lydia has mentioned it, there is this reputational damage that is closely linked with labor migration or the externalization of migrant worker from Uganda. Is clear, everyone is an angel, is practicing good, they are recruiting and they are monitoring. No, there are really room for improvement. But at the same time also, sometimes people are blaming this sector because they do not know all the challenges that the sector is going through. So it will be good also, we bring on this discussion, the media, so that people knows what is going on. So that when people have a better understanding of what is ethical recruitment, they have also the better understanding of what are the migrant rights, have the better understanding of what are the challenges that this sector is facing and how we can, in a very holistic way, because as I said it at the beginning, it's a multi-stakeholder management so that we can know what is the role and responsibility of everyone. Because at the end of the day, the main regulator and the duty bearer is the government, definitely. But the government cannot make it itself alone. It should be a multi-stakeholder approach and a responsibility to play. Another thing I may, and please, Monica, feel free to stop me because I'm somehow a little bit like Lydia. If I am from West Africa, and we know we West African, when we start speaking, we don't stop. So please feel free to make me stop. Another area I would like to touch base is the empowerment of the migrant worker. And this empowerment should start from the countries of origin. I have noticed something. If we have very nice BLA, very nice contract, and still people are very, are still, because it's a very cultural oriented. As I told you, I come from West Africa. We are very open up. We speak our mind. And one of my cultural shock when I moved to Eastern Africa is that people are very quiet. It's very difficult to even to know what people are thinking. So if you are now engaged in labor mobility and labor migration, where you have to deal with another culture, maybe the fact that you, when you are talking with race as something, as a sign of politeness, maybe your boss will see it as a kind of submission. And remember, we are in countries where they have been practicing kafala. And kafala mean what? Literally, your boss, you are the slaves of your boss. Let's call us a cat, unfortunately. So we need also to empower these girls. One way is that to let them, and I know many companies, they briefed it in their contract. But when they arrive, if the employer challenge them, telling them that, this contract, you signed it in Uganda, it doesn't apply here, the girl should be able to step. Hello.
So,
Elijah, could you please mute?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I think
sorry. So I was saying, empowering this migrant worker to know their right and to stand for it, despite the education they have received. Because when they are in, are not the same. So they need to stand for their right. And one way is that they need to be empowered while they are still in countries of destination. But if you go to countries of, while they are still in countries of origin, sorry. Because if this is lacking, that's why sometimes you go, this lady, you will hear a story like, oh, I show her my contract, say this is not your contract, it's not valid. A contract remains a legal document. And I always tell the PRAs that they need to make these ladies understand that this contract was not developed by Uganda. It's not Uganda who issued. It was issued by the government of Saudi, if I take the case of Saudi. So it's a legal document. So whatever is written there, it's a legal document. But if the girl is not confirmed, is not convinced, and it has not been empowered to know that this is my legal document, whatever is written here, I'm entitled to. That's why sometimes there are many abuse. So Monica, I don't know whether I can pursue or I should just wrap up.
I think you need to wrap up.
So much. I think I have touched. Yeah, the last one is the skilling. Also, if a country like Uganda wants really to benefit from this sector, we need skilling. Even domestic workers need proper skilling. Today, if you compare a salary of a Philippine domestic worker and the one of a Ugandan, there is a big difference. And at the end of the day, the basic explanation is that the Philippine migrant workers are skilled and they got certified, which is not the case. So this is also another area, and I hope that the governor will be, mainly the Minister of Gender, Labor and Social Development, will will be also looking forward on how we can better skill these migrant workers, mainly the domestic one, and also provide them with certification. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much for the time and for listening to me. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. I'm going to hand over to Krisha now to quickly handle the Q&A session. I'm sorry we've taken up so much of the time with the panel, but I think it was a very rich discussion. Yes, so Krisha, please go ahead with the Q&A. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much to all the panelists for all their insightful presentations. It was very interesting and engaging, as you can see from all the questions and discussion in the chat and also within our Q&A panel. So I will prioritize some of the questions we have in the Q&A box. And depending on time, we might be able to get to some of the questions in the chat. So I'd like to start with Charlene's first question. She says, we have interacted with survivors during various trainings on their legal rights. Some share that they have friends who are locked up in prisons abroad and would like to support them to return home. What kind of support can be offered to low-income families whose loved ones are... I'd like to direct this to anybody in the panel who would like to answer. And just to note, you can find this in the Q&A section. You might have 3 notifications on there.
Okay, since no one, you said anyone, and no one is coming up. First of all, if somebody is in prison, abroad, they're in prison for different reasons, okay? Because, also when you go abroad, you have to abide by the, regulations. So it has to be on a one-on-one basis. And I know that our missions abroad, for example, the embassies, if they are near an embassy officials also visit, prisons, and so they should know in case they have that number to reach out. If they're in Uganda and, they're alone and you think it's connected to trafficking, come to the Prevention of Trafficking Persons Office. A relative can come and report. I know that Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, if it involves a recruitment agency, that's another stop, but also Ministry of Internal Affairs if it is connected to trafficking, and also missions abroad. So I thought I would give that information. Thank you.
If I can, on what Agnes has just said, which is actually the normal pathway to follow. Sometime also when we heard about those kind of cases, through IAM, as I was saying, we have some missions in those countries, and we are working with some civil society association there. We can help by reaching, linking the family with those COC so that they can take up the case. But all also depend on why the migrant worker was put in jail, because at the on the if it is a crime or is it a fault or whatever has put that migrant worker in jail. Over to you.
Thank you so much for answering that question to you both. And I guess our next question is from Adola. When the government cancels a bilateral agreement, does it and how does it support the workers who have already been deployed and placed there? For example, the workers in Jordan.
I think this should be addressed by Hillary. Hillary, are you with us? Okay, so it looks like maybe.
I think Hillary is connected. Yeah, but Agnes is here.
Okay, not responding. I remember it comes not just canceling BLOA, but sometimes even when they suspend, I think it's also when they suspend suspend the company taking exporting labor abroad. I think because we also in the collaboration, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is our representation, abroad. Okay, so usually when people report to the coordination office for prevention of trafficking persons. That is if it is connected to trafficking, even if it is not, but it is through connected to recruitment agency and there's a challenge somewhere. We liaise with the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. We liaise with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also Interpol, depending on the circumstances. But there are some people, even when they suspend bilateral agreements and the people, it's still binding. I mean, it is still, they are working well and there is no abuse. And somebody is at work, so finish your contract. You know, it is okay. It doesn't mean that it is just that that person no longer can export, because by the time you are externalized, things were okay during that time. Or if the situation is okay where you are, you can continue working. But when there is a challenge, then you reach out. And also I know Boli, there's something like, you know, where we have missions abroad, but also if there's no Ugandan mission abroad, you can also go to because we belong to the East African community. So if you went to the to an embassy which belongs to the East African community and you're Ugandan, they can also be assistance. You know, they are in with that collaboration. They are in. Thank you.
All right, Monica, do you think we have enough time for another question? Depending on does everybody have enough time?
Yes, I think we could take maybe about 2 more questions. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to actually turn to the chat to see if there are any questions on there that we could have. Let's. And it says when the country cancels. Okay, when the country cancels BLA. Oh wait, that we just. Okay, we just answered a similar question. Okay, how about the one from Lillian? What has been done by the government of Uganda in dealing with agents who externalize labor, and in most cases they have other agents / their friends in Kenya? If we are unable to answer this question, I could also move on.
Hold on. About Asians who externalize labor, did you say?
Yes, this is from a chat question from Lillian. It says, what has been done by the government of Uganda in dealing with agents who externalize labor? And in most cases, they have other agents or their friends in Kenya.
Okay, I don't know about Asians. I know that if there's a recruitment agency and Asians would be working with them or something, but I don't know any particular Asians that this is an Asian or this is a white.
Sorry, agents.
Oh, agents. Okay, I had Asians,
sorry.
you know. Sorry. Sometimes, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Because if you're a recruitment agency, you're given licenses to recruit. If you have an agent where there's abuse, you know, in the process and they are not legalized to do it, then there's a problem, you know, there's a problem with that. But if you're not legalized and you are an agent, that means you're doing it outside, you know, the recruitment, what you have to be licensed. And if you're licensed and using other people, and those other people are causing abuse in the process, then that's the problem. Depends on, because you have to abide by the rules and regulations of labor externalization. I wish Hillary was here also, you know, to add in something, but just in case you are there, Hillary, and you think.
Madam Agnes, I can just add in something. Yeah. I think first and foremost, we can't even call them agents. Those will be illegal recruiters, because if they are not licensed or working on behalf of a licensed company, and they recruit people and place them for employment, illegal recruiters. They are not even agents of anyone, but illegal recruiters. So they have no bearing on them.
Thank you both, and sorry, I'll try and enunciate my words. I have a bit of a California accent, so my mistake. And I think we have time for just one last question, and there's actually a new one in the Q&A from Daisy. And Daisy asks, what measures are in place to ensure that a banned, revoked company does not open up another company and disguise? And this is open to anybody.
Better position to answer it. Yeah.
Yes, Hillary, please go ahead. Hillary, please go ahead. You've raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Sorry. Yes, I'm saying, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we can hear
Hillary,
you.
we can hear.
Yeah, I was saying I'm experiencing internet challenges. Sorry. On the issue of when a bilateral labor agreement is suspended, what is the fate of the migrant workers? Agnes has said, for all the responsibilities revert to government. So government, using its different structures abroad, is able to help out those migrant workers.
I'm sorry, we seem to have lost you, Hillary.
With Jordan, so it's overseen by Saudi Arabia. Lydia said Saudi Arabia. So
Yeah, I think Hillary, the network is really bad. He has dropped off, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's that one. If a company is banned, and then they open, another one, I think that comes within the monitoring and all that. And I think you have the. I don't think that's allowed if it's like the same company. And there are also reasons for banning, reasons for banning, but also it takes information because if you know that the person who has been banned is using, because sometimes it may not be them directly, but they may be behind it and no one knows. So the critical thing is information and then policing, because even if you're a citizen, and you see it and the community is sensitized and that information is shared, that could help. Because banning means that you did not meet certain requirements. That's what it means. And sometimes when it is suspension, because there's a difference, because it's and you put the things that were required right, and it did not tantamount to banning, then that is also a difference. Hillary, are you back? Oh dear.
So it seems we are having some connectivity issues with Hillary. But I think for now we can, there's another very interesting question. Hello? Yes?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that, yes, hello. I just wanted to note that in the current legal framework, they have been finding loopholes to open up different companies after closing the other. But when you look at the migrant labor regulations that have been actually reviewed that are currently before going through the process of being approved, actually that particular loophole has been patched up in a way that they're saying one of the conditions, if you've once been a director in a company that has been whose license has been cancelled, you cannot be given a license. So there's been loophole, but like I noted, those are some of the big steps that government is taking to sort of like try to streamline the sector. So I can just chip in there on behalf of Hillary.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you again for your insights. And while we also wait for Hillary to connect and chip in as well, there is another very interesting question in the chat from Bright. So again, open to any panelists. Are there mechanisms in place at border points and at the airport to ensure only cleared migrants can travel e.g. checking contracts and ministry clearance. I think there is something up with Hillary's connection, so let me just take care of that.
Okay, since I work for immigration, I'll answer. Because that is, airports, and all that. Is that okay?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Can I go? What usually happens, because ministry, just a minute, let me just let these people. Sorry, I was just telling them that I'm in a meeting so that they can, reduce on the some noise, because I'm in at the roadside. At the border points, what usually happens, the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, which also has a representation, by the way, there's always a desk when they are clearing migrant workers. So they send lists to the airport. So immigration gets those lists, but also security. There's also security, and then there's gender representation. So they check the lists to make sure that they confirm that only the legalized people, are moving. So there's a lot of due diligence, at least the coordination between Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development and the exit points, but also with the security. But for people who don't use those, the recruitment agents, that's where the challenge is. But still, we have to train immigration officers on how to identify even those, because remember, it's not only recruitment agencies, but there are some people get opportunities as individuals and other ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we might just have time for one last question before we do closing remarks, depending on how the answer will be. And looks like there's a new question on the chat, and it says, it's from David. What remedies does a worker in distress have when abroad or upon return, considering the fact that majority of them can't sustain civil suits in courts of law?
If I may, I think Hilary in his mechanism that upon return, if a migrant worker has gone through grievance or distress, they can revert to them to get access to remedies. What we have been also working with the URR to support, and we have explained them that we can also support through our offices that are in those countries to support migrant workers in accessing to remedies while they are in countries of destination, because sometimes this issue it's better to address them while the migrant worker is still in the countries of destination, rather than trying to address them once they are back in countries of origin, because sometimes the jurisdictions are not the same, and it can be very complicated for migrant workers sometimes, because they don't even know because of lack of information, they don't even know that there are some mechanisms that are there for them to help. I believe that COCs are the most closer to the community, and also those grassroots leaders that someone mentioned in the panel. We need to, those kind of information need to reach the migrant worker while he or she is still in the recruitment process, so that when he has grievance or issues in countries of destination, there are mechanisms that can support him or her to access to remedy while he or she is in the countries of destination. I have mentioned the COCs, I have mentioned other international organizations that are there on top of the government institution, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the embassies, and the consular services. So For the person who asked the question, yes, there is possibility to access to remedy while abroad if you are you manage to the migrant workers refer to the COCs that are present there or to other international organizations such as IAM or ILO. Over to you.
Thank you again. Monica, do you think we have enough time for another question? Or should that have been our last and we can do closing remarks next?
Ideally, that should have been the last. We are about 15 minutes over the time that we had planned for. So maybe if there's one burning question, I mean, yes, then we can wrap up and close. Yes, it's pretty late here in Uganda, so yeah.
All right, and Hillary seems to have disconnected. So it looks like I think I'm going to turn back to the Q&A. This might be a burning question. So exploitation of refugees and asylum seekers is currently going. Pandemic continues to bite hard on the vulnerable persons. Are there any government interventions currently in place to particularly create awareness on TIP in refugee camps or support for victims? Is there any data on this? If not, can they be prioritized as well? So this is particularly geared towards the topic of refugees and asylum seekers, and it's from Charlene.
Okay, sorry. I can't. Is there somebody? I don't want to dominate.
No, you're not dominating.
Yeah, because I don't want to dominate.
No, go ahead.
At the prevention of trafficking persons, office, like I said, we have a task force, and one of the members on that task force, when I was mentioning, because I was just mentioning a few, but there's also Office of the Prime Minister, which has representation. Done awareness also in refugee camps, and in case there's a situation on which falls on asylum seekers or refugees, but not only those, but also foreigners, because trafficking doesn't only happen, because today we are only concentrating on Ugandans abroad, but there are also people who are trafficked to Uganda, just as Ugandans are also trafficked abroad or are in distress. So yes, there's a representation, and anything to do with the refugee issues or asylum seekers, that falls under the refugee department, which is represented at the task force, and they bring out these issues all the time, any issues that fall under there. And if anybody has those issues, please reach out. That is Office of the Prime Minister, refugee, section. But also you can come to our offices. We coordinate, monitor, and oversee. So when those situations come through our office, we also liaise with the responsible officers therein. Thank you.
I just want also, it's not an answer to, I'm not add to anything you have answered. I think that's the right one. But just to also clarify that refugee is not forcibly a migrant, though they are both population in movement, but they are not moving for the same reason. And refugee, most of the time, they fall under forced migration, and they fall under the mandate at the UN level of UNHCR, while migrants, they can be both internal migrants and international migrants. So, and most of the time, when we talk about labor mobility, we are talking about the economic migrant, what we call the economic migrant, those people moving to find better opportunity. So it may happen that sometimes some refugees are mixed in this flow, but normally, in normal setting, they should not be engaged in labor mobility because they are governed by other as refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you. Over to you.
So thank you to all our panelists for for speaking and for answering the Q&A. There's been a ton of engagement in the chat and within the Q&A box. And I'm sorry to anybody whose questions we did not get to go through today. So as we mentioned earlier, this whole webinar will be available on our Facebook and YouTube, and the report will be sent to everybody after the event. And so thank you once again to all of our panelists. We're super grateful for your insights, and thank you to everybody who attended. And I just want to hand this over to Monica as well for her closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Krisha. We appreciate our panelists so much for putting so much work into this event. We are grateful that this is something that we've been, and it's an area that we feel as an organization would really help. Streamlining labor externalization would really help the issues of human trafficking that the country is facing. And therefore, this is something that I think we all need to rally behind and do our bit. Sometimes the bit may be information sharing or just guiding members through. One thing that Hilary mentioned that I think is very pertinent is that we need to look out for information from the Ministry of Gender on labor externalization. Most of that is posted on the website through the EEMIS portal. That is a very good resource for information on labor export. And therefore, I would say thank you so much. We have begun the conversation on labor export, and we shall keep calling upon you to help us to. We have probably a system that is workable and sustainable and addresses the issues that have led to the problem of trafficking within the labor export processes. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our attendees for staying with us up to 8 p.m. We really appreciate that. I know the attendees on the US side had to get up very early. Thank you for carving out that time, for making the time for that. We look forward to having you again at a forum perhaps like this, or maybe physical in the near future. And yes, so we shall close it at this. As Krisha May mentioned, the resources that have been utilized during this event will be shared in the post-event email. And any questions that you may have, or if you need further information, you can just request for it and it will be available to you. Everybody have a good day and a good evening.
Thank you and bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. And thank
Bye.
you for helping with us.